All right, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us here today. My name is Mitchell Hora. This is a Topsoil podcast from Continuum Ag. Thanks for hanging out and joining us here. It looks like we could have a pretty awesome big crowd here today. But for anyone that doesn't make it, these are recorded. They'll be up on our YouTube page here usually in the next couple of days. We'll also take the audio and put it on our Topsoil podcast here as well. So be sure to check out some of our previous webinars if you'd like to see those as well on our YouTube page or on the Topsoil podcast. As I said, my name is Mitchell. I'm the founder and CEO here at Continuum Ag. We really continue to change a lot. Some of you see some of the names here. I've been watching what we've been up to for a long time. Amy and I have been hanging out for a long time. And things keep changing for both of us. So kind of fun that we're gonna, this is gonna be a fun one here, and just kind of catching up on all these things that are happening in the world of sustainable ag, really, in the world of soil health, and now in the world of carbon and telling our story. So, Continuum Ag, we're still helping to provide farmers with soil health insights and data and systems, but really focused here now too on how do we tell that story from a carbon or carbon intensity perspective. So we're going to get into that a little bit here today, but I specifically wanted to have Amy on because we were looking at having Amy tied in with our field day here this summer, and we weren't able to have Amy. And I'm like, Amy, I really want to have you in on the podcast because there's some really cool data that Farm Journal, Trust in Food put together. And I think it's going to be able to create some really great insights for all of you here. I think it just makes a ton of sense, when I saw the results. So we're really going to dig into that. But to tee things up, we'll give a little bit more info on what the heck is Trust in Food. And I'm going to share a little bit of insight on from the results here about carbon and carbon markets, share why I think things are going so hard to the carbon intensity side of things. But Trust in Food also has a climate smart grant that we're going to share a little bit of insight on here as well. I'm going to turn things over to Amy, but the other piece of this, some of you might have heard the name Amy Skoczlas Cole before because of the Fieldwork podcast. And Amy was the original mind behind the Fieldwork podcast. Amy and I got connected because I got roped into speaking at an event here in Iowa that public radio was putting it on. They asked the Farm Bureau to be involved. I'm on our local Washington County Farm Bureau board, and my uncle is the regional manager. So my uncle, twisted my arm and said, "Hey, there's this event going on up in Iowa City. We're talking about soil health and sustainability, and it's at a brewery." And I'm like, well, soil health and drinking beer kind of, high on my interest list. So I got roped into speaking at this event. There was like a couple hundred people there, but Amy was there and some of the rest of her team from, at that point, it was, American Public Media that was hosting these events. And that's when Amy and I got connected, and she's like, "Hey, I've got this idea for a podcast." And I don't know, a couple months later, we launched the podcast with Zach, and shoot, four seasons or so later, and tons of downloads and listens, millions some downloads and listens. Here we are. So, but anyway, but now Amy's no longer with American Public Media, no longer with the podcast. The podcast, obviously, some of you guys probably know it's a little bit in limbo right now. We're trying to figure out what we should do with it and what the next steps for the podcast are going to be. But Amy's now running Trust in Food, which I think everyone here knows about Farm Journal, but maybe not everyone knows Trust in Food. So maybe, Amy, number one, thanks for spending the time here. I know you're swamped today, and we're really lucky that we were able to make this work, and I'm grateful for you to make it work for us. But share a little bit on, Trust in Food, and I'll help control your slides. So you just tell me when to go from there.
Fabulous. Well, I feel like this is like turnabout is fair play, Mitchell. Like, I feel like for the probably 6 or 7 years we've known each other, I have shoved you in front of cameras and put microphones in front of you all over the country. So I feel like this is paybacks. Hopefully your audience will go easy on me here and be friendly. But yeah, so
Sure.
It is fun to reconnect. The thing that you and I have gelled over is, I would say, not just soil health. Like there's lots of folks in the world who are thinking about soil health, but sort of what drives me, and I think drives you, is like, how do we find really pragmatic solutions that help farmers on the journey to continuing to improve soil health, continuing to be stewards of land and water and air. And there is so much opportunity, as we all know, and then there is the reality. And where do those things go together? So I think that's a little bit about, sort of the theme that you're going to hear from me over the next however long we've got, is, where does the rubber hit the road on this one? How do we actually figure out how we support producers along the way? And how do we make this work? How do we make it all work? So.
And I always talk about that. It always boils down to, we got to help farmers overcome the logistic constraints of change and the economic constraints or risks. That's really what it boils down to.
Yep.
Okay. So, but that tees into, Farm Journal's always been talking about farming and agriculture. And obviously everyone knows Farm Journal and the big ag media player, but they saw something here along these like sustainability lines. And now that is basically what has evolved into Trust in Food, correct?
Yeah. So I joined Trust in Food not quite 4 years ago. It's crazy how time flies. And it was an initiative that Farm Journal had started before I had gotten there. And, hopefully everyone in your audience does know who Farm Journal is. You may touch a different part of the company depending, where you sit. But not only are we Farm Journal Magazine, we're AgWeb across digital platforms, and we actually serve, just about every market and every category in agriculture. You can see sort of the media properties, Ag Day TV, Tyne Morgan, and so, Farm Journal is actually about 147 years old, and the mission of the company has always been to help producers get the information that they need to make the decisions on their journey to help with the business decisions. And so, some number of years ago, when the company executives were sitting and talking, they saw that conservation agriculture, or sustainable ag, or regenerative ag, or climate smart ag, or whatever label we want to put on top of it today.
Pick your label.
Pick your label of du jour. They saw that this was a force that was like fundamentally going to change what farmers and ranchers and growers are being asked to do and how you're being asked to run your businesses. And so it felt important to figure out how do you help producers navigate this change? And then, as the name Trust in Food sort of implies, how do we do this at the speed of innovation that U.S. agriculture is known for, right? How do we apply the innovation, the change, our ability to change pretty quickly on a dime to meet world needs? How do we do that in this space? Especially when we're working across operations, as probably everyone knows. I'm used to having to talk to non-ag audiences too, operations that don't have that many points in time in a year in which you can make a decision. Or, it's a 12-month lag before you get to do that again. So Trust in Food was started about 5 years ago, and really has been focused on how do we help farmers on that journey. Right. So talking about who we are a purpose-driven division of the company. And it's actually exactly like you just said. Like, we think that in the world of conservation agriculture, there are 3 things that we need to be focused on. And we look at this like little golden triangle. The technical assistance, which is the good science, the capacity in the community for peer-to-peer sharing, for the type of work that our extension agents do, the type that our advisors and crop consultants do, what you turn to your ag retailer around. These are all fundamental bedrocks of change. That's the information piece. And then, of course, as you said, we got no conversation if this doesn't pencil out, right? So figuring out not just the financial incentives, but also the financial de-risking. So these are like the fundamental bedrocks. And I feel like conservation agriculture has done a really improving job. I'm not going to say great job, but improving job at meeting these things here. What it really hasn't done, though, is actually taken the human element into consideration. And so that's where we really specialize, because we're Farm Journal, right? So what does it mean to be a producer like Mitchell Hora And what's your neighbor, and how is your neighbor have maybe different goals, different logistical barriers than you have, and how do we actually tailor a prescription or a solution for you versus someone else? And I know that's, you know, a lot about what Continuum Ag is about too. So we really share that. So if you go to the next slide, when
Did
we're
I
talking,
skip over? Did you want to go back to this other one? I kind of.
oh, maybe we're out of order. Yeah, let me
Is it
talk about
okay?
that. So yeah, thank you. What we're really about when we talk about the human dimensions of change are these four things. Like, we think in order for someone to make a change within their operation, and have it be sustainable and have them see value in it, at the end of the day, there are four considerations that have to get made. And these are sort of like independent variables, if you will. So the first thing is, does the producer understand and what is we're talking about? So, you know, my background picture here, you know, putting animals back into the landscape. Does a producer in Iowa understand what that means, how that might look in their operation, right? I'm not in Minnesota right now, but I live in Minnesota. This has been a big theme. You know, we can talk about it in theory, but when it comes to rubber meeting the road, do you understand what that means? And then the second piece is, do you see value in it for your operational goals? And since every producer's business is different, and every acre is different, you know, figuring out the connection points between what it is you're thinking about doing and the value that it provides to your operation is a second piece. And then this third piece around feeling capable, you actually really hit on. This is the logistical challenges, and that can be everything from, you know, do I have the labor I need? Do I have the equipment I need? You know, for our friend Zach in Western Minnesota, do I have enough days in my season to do what I want to do? You know, do I have the capital that I need? Do I have the market that I need? Do I have the advice that I need? Do I have, then we start to get into, do I have the family support? Because how many operations today are, you know, one person making a decision all by themselves, with no input from a family? Do I have the support in my community? So you and I have talked before about how where you are in Washington County, Iowa, there's something in the water around cover crops, right? I think you all lost your slot actually as the like cover crop capital of the US.
Might have. There, I just saw a report the
still
other day. Iowa's like 3.6 million acres now, and like 16% of Iowa has cover crops on. Is the latest report that I saw. I was like, holy crap, that is awesome.
So like what are the community norms? And in this, you know, it's also about like just change is hard. Change takes time. Change takes time and energy. You know, are you gonna plan this, or are you gonna go spend time with your family? These are trade-offs, right? And then the final piece is, you know, intent for action. What resources, what things do you need in order to help you take the next step? So this is really what we're doing at Trust and Food. Everything I'm about to talk about, this is sort of the fundamental bedrock of like, we believe that every producer deserves to have this kind of information and insight about what they're thinking about doing before they're being asked to make a change.
And this is interesting that, you know, and seeing like so many of the names that are in here today, that like where Continuum Ag comes in, like we've skipped way like later in this to like, hey, the feeling capable, hey, we'll help you with the how to, we'll help you to create a plan and have some intent, and here's the goals and stuff. But yeah, do a lot of the farmers don't understand those initial pieces, you know, of like, what the heck is the value in building soil health or adopting some of these practices? Like, and yeah, can I see, the value, and like, what am I actually gonna get because of that? So I think people are catching on to that. I think the stackable value propositions are coming there, but this is really great to start with. It. We got to have all four of these components really put together in order for people to actually feel comfortable making a change.
To feel comfortable making a change. And you know what? This is not all that different than like when I'm going to make a big change in my life, right? Like buy a car or whatever, right? I mean, not that I do that all that often, but like and you talked about the value piece. I mean, too often the conversation is about the financial incentive. And again, that's a necessary piece of the puzzle. That's essential. That's foundational. That's elemental. But it's not the whole puzzle, right? It's not enough on its own.
That's right.
So yeah.
Okay. Back up. Okay. You had this other one, and then we're going to get into
okay. So, perfect. So then there's kind of two ways that we put this perspective, you might say, to work. Probably the thing that we're most, people see us most visibly for is our programming, like on the ground, kind of coast to coast, state to state. And the two programs that are sort of those like stakeholder, multi-partner, initiatives are America's Conservation Ag Movement, which has really been focused over the last 5 years now on, row crop agriculture and specialty crops, coast to coast. How do we actually do peer learning networks? How do we help producers in each individual place with their own operation learn from each other and have the information they need to sort of go through the journey that we talked about? We've got 18 partners, including funding from USDA and RCS on this, as well as, like 15 private sector and conservation partners that are all part of this. And I guess the thing that I want people to know is that there are folks like us out there who are trying to put the farmer first. Mm-hmm. There's so many initiatives that are trying to say, let's make change, where they're trying to drive top down. Let's have a top-down conversation. So-and-so wants this to happen, and it filters down to you all. And there's some folks for whom that might be an attractive option, but it doesn't actually take people through the change journey. So what we're really trying to do with these programs is, how do we help take people through the change journey so that at the end of the day, you feel like your life is better because of the changes that you've made. Yeah. And then about 2 years ago, we stood up Trust and Beef, and it's pretty nascent. We're still getting our legs underneath us. We've got some great partners. But this was really like, we see an accelerating set of misinformation in the world about the role in particular of beef cattle and dairy cattle in our landscapes and in American agriculture, and the impact that they have on the environment. Yeah. And just as an aside, there was a conference in my hometown of Minneapolis that brought in, that was like a European organization that came in, and it was called the Future of Food. And a lot of folks in this community were there. The conference had entirely vegan food options, and the moderators that had come over from Europe really were set in saying there was no value for animal agriculture as it comes to thinking about, combating climate change and even building resilience into systems. And so that's actually something that we at Farm Journal felt like, oh my gosh, that's actually very threatening to the entire model. Not only is it factually inaccurate, right, and scientifically inaccurate, but it is threatening to the whole model. So we stood that program up. And so these two programs, I can't remember what slide I have next, but sort of have this foundational element of everything that we've talked about, and are putting them on the ground. We work in 10 different states through those programs.
Well, and a lot of you guys know, we had our buddy Jimmy Emons is deep into the Trust and Beef side of things. A lot of folks in this network know Jimmy, really pushing things on the row crop side, but also obviously very involved in the Trust and Beef piece there too, and shared some of those insights at our field day here this past summer.
That's right. Jimmy actually runs this entire world for us. He runs all of our conservation programs. So he runs America's Conservation Ag Movement. He runs Trust and Beef, and we'll talk about later our Climate Smart grant as well. So he has his hands more than full. And as you know, he'd rather have his hands in the dirt. So we're grateful to him for taking this on.
My buddy Bob actually just put a really good a good question in here, and just because I know kind of what's coming next, I want to jump in and address this one. And everybody, please put questions in the chat. Most of them will probably kind of wait, but this one actually is good to kind of jump in here, talking about the animal side, because we're mostly going to talk about row crop. So Bob and I were just chatting the other day. Bob's out in Nebraska. There's a lot of labeling going on now of sustainably sourced and low carbon beef or other products and stuff. Do you guys have a sense on, how do we need to go about labeling and what goes into some of these labels, and how do we make sure that we're not greenwashing when it comes to putting labels on some of these animal ag products?
So it is a really good topic, and I would say that we are just in the earliest of days. So if we've been talking about ag carbon markets being the Wild West for 10 years, low carbon beef claims are like the wildest of the wild west. I don't know, maybe that's Mars or something, because we've just seen them cropping up. And so I think we are waiting to see how USDA evolves here. My perspective is probably similar to your perspective. We do need to be really, really careful about greenwashing. And it's really important that we're talking about the entirety. This is sort of a point that I pound on too much, but like, we really have to be looking at the entire ecosystem and system that we're producing within. And so having a sort of low carbon type of label really only speaks to, certain kinds of molecules, not the entire system of what can be done with good grazing management, with, not to mention, open space preservation, habitat restoration, wetland protection, all the kinds of things that, well done animal agriculture actually protects for us. I will take a, grazing pastures over a subdivision any day across our landscape. And I think that's something that a low carbon label just does not take into account.
All the rest of the ecosystem,
all the benefits, right? All these things we've talked about as co-benefits. So what I would say is it's really important that I think this is an area where my perspective is that the value of what the producer is offering on the landscape needs to translate with the commodity. So I am encouraged that we're talking about a value-added commodity rather than a separate thing like a carbon credit in most of these places. So I'm encouraged by that. And I believe that we have to broaden the conversation beyond just low carbon. Like, that's a piece of it. But it can't be the whole thing. We need to, look, Americans love our cowboys. Really, like, there's great consumer research that farmers and ranchers are the most believable people in the United States. And Americans want to hear stories about what it's like to do this, because only 2% of Americans get to do it anymore. And so, if we can reconnect to the roots of what this is all about, rather than counting the molecules, we will be so much better off. And I know we'll get to carbon intensity and,
I thought with Yellowstone having the success that it's had, I thought that's already telling our story. That's how all the farming, all the ranching is done, right? It's just like Yellowstone.
Every ranch I've been on looks like that. You too, right?
Maybe not quite, but okay. So that is some good points there. So real quick to put this to bed, some of these like labels around sustainability for livestock, are there some of like those metrics that are kind of being developed right now, or is it still kind of like, hey, people can kind of slap a label on it, but we don't really know what's behind it yet? Or any final kind of take on the status of?
So, like, I would say watch this space. USDA has permitted labels to date. I don't know that their thinking is crystal transparent on how they're going to think about this. I would just say, like, let's stop waiting for USDA is a good theme all in general. Like, as a community, what do we think the right thing is for producers? And I'll just make this point. We can bemoan, and we will, as we talk about why are farmers not ready to sign up for carbon markets, we can bemoan how poorly structured carbon markets are for annualized systems. They were never designed for that. We can bemoan that. In the world of animal agriculture, we actually have an opportunity with climate smart commodities to reimagine not the rules of the game are. The science has to work, but how we think about the metrics.
100%.
Yep.
Totally agree. And you pointed out, it's it needs to be beyond just the carbon component, but it needs to be, some of those metrics, some of those data points. Maybe it's, some practices that go into that. So there's some qualitative information plus some quantitative information, but building it out to be robust. But to your point, we need to get ahead of this and not wait for USDA, because the concern being, and I know Bob and I share the concern of like, hey, if we can just slap all kinds of labels out there and create additional confusion into a market that's already confused, especially when it comes to the beef and dairy industry, where they're hearing like, these are the worst things ever, and we need to end all animal agriculture, versus we're saying, hey, no, this actually is sustainable, and here's all these different labels. We need to be able to make sure that they're here. That it's got to just be so incredibly confusing, the dynamic between those two. That one side, livestock is imperative to sustainability. The other side, we have to get rid of all livestock if we're going to be sustainable.
So we are partnered, the US Roundtable for Sustainable Beef
Mhm.
is a good partner of Trust in Beef. And, one of the things that they are encouraging is at a producer level, like let's actually formalize the great work that producers are already doing so we can communicate about that. So that looks like, how do you put in, so we got to the practice point, right? How do we put in grazing management plans? How do we get them written down? How do we manage to them? And then how do we improve upon them and alter them as time goes on and we hit reality? Just doing that as a start, really focusing on both, on the quality side, which the industry does such an amazing job with, as well as the grazing management plan. And as we talk into the feed system, that's a whole nother set of things to be considering, but there's, enormous efficiencies to be gained there that we're already seeing leading feeders lean into. So there's a lot we can be doing. I would say the two things to be thinking about, and this doesn't always feel natural for agriculture, and I get it, I get why. The first is to acknowledge there's room for improvement.
Yeah.
And like, we're going to see this in the carbon work too. Everybody wants to get sort of credit in consumers' minds for the enormous, say, quality lift. If we're talking about beef, the quality lift over the last, what, 40 years, right?
Yeah.
But we see that in the center of the plate. So now it's like, let's both acknowledge that there's room for improvement and show concretely what we're doing.
Yeah.
A part of the world is obsessed with the metrics, but most of the world is obsessed with, do I see the person across the way sharing the value that I have and managing in that way?
For sure.
We would be such better off if we thought about this as like a human to human type of interaction.
Totally agree. I think it's a combo though.
Yeah.
It's a combo of the feel good, knowing your farmer, having traceability, having that guidance, plus also like,
Said
hey,
the T word. We don't say the T word, but yeah.
No T word of
No
transparency.
T word, but yeah. Yeah. I mean, traceability is a hot topic, right?
Yeah.
Very, very hot topic, very controversial, lots of good reasons that folks have lots of feelings about it. I don't think it's inevitable, but I think it is that point of where the feel, like, I would say that it's not both sides. It's like the two things coming together. We have to have the feel good with the proof
That's
of what
right.
we're doing.
That's right. I totally agree. And proof of like, okay, here are those outcomes that we're striving for that do create good. Like, here's what we're doing and here's why we're doing it, because it actually creates some of these outcomes. Okay.
Yep.
Let's jump back into this. One of the ways, in my opinion, one of the ways that everyone thought that we were going to be able to maybe do this is through these carbon credits and carbon offset credits. And you guys did some really interesting digging into this, and would love to, let's dig into what you guys found and ask the farmers about carbon credits.
Yeah. So this is work that we released last year, about a year ago, actually. You can see the little QR code. So for folks who really do want to unpack it, it is available on our website, downloadable, free. And it's exactly as you said. Like, my question was, like, we are counting on, there's so much hype over, producers are going to get paid and see the value and all that we're asking them to do and all the consumer expectations that are being put on them through the carbon market. So we went out and we said, this report is called Ready or Not, US farmers and carbon markets. And what we looked at was a number of different dimensions of how producers, this is specifically, I should say, row crop producers was the first cut of this report. And as we looked, what we saw was that there's broad awareness of carbon markets. Folks know what they are all about, said they were aware of it, and only a tiny fraction in our research, about 3%, said that they were interested in and ready to participate. And I will say, I think Purdue also does some tracking around here, and our numbers more or less, it is just small fractions. So our numbers do add up. And so I think that if you're in the world of sustainable agriculture, it's a small circles, and people probably know lots of folks who are doing this, but it really has not become mainstream. If we think about sort of an adoption curve, right, it's really still at that very, very beginning. So people who are experimenting here are really, really an outlier. And so there were kind of two big reasons that folks talked about not wanting to participate. The first was the the joining, the work, the payment, what I understand of it, isn't attractive to me. Like it's just too much where, the juice is not worth the squeeze.
Yep.
That's that 59%. And then the 31% are really what I would say the market timers. So these were folks who are like, yeah, I think I'm going to do this one day, but I expect that, I expect the price of carbon, basically to go up over time. If you add those two things together, what you can basically, like the thing I wanted carbon markets to hear, if I've got anybody listening, what I wanted carbon markets to hear was like, something has to change if we're going to reach the mainstream of American agriculture with this possibility.
I think that's just becoming abundantly clear. And we're seeing a lot of changes with like companies that had carbon programs too. Like they're all, in my opinion, all kind of saying like, geez, like we don't really know like what's going on with carbon markets, what's going on with like insetting or scope 3 stuff, this carbon intensity thing. Like it's just, in my opinion, a lot of just kind of like, all right, let's kind of pump the brakes here a little bit. That kind of occurred maybe year and a half or so ago. Everyone just kind of pumped the brakes, said a lot of uncertainty, but this is really, really good. And this is really, folks, what I wanted to show you, all you guys. I'm part of a, I forget what we're called, the Carbon Council or something like that. Carbon Advisory Group. So I got to see some of the report early on and read the whole thing, and just I thought it was awesome and resonated really well. And I use this number all the time of 93% of farmers know about carbon markets. Only 3% of farmers have actually participated.
Yep.
Basically, like everyone knows about this stuff. Not really anyone's doing it, but especially, to then the next data point of it's going to take some change for people to want to participate. They're not saying I would never do it. That's the key takeaway there. They're saying, hey, I would love to do something here, but I'm not going to sign up for the offer as it is today.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly the right takeaway. Yep.
And okay. So here's more of the detail.
Okay. So then this is an eye chart of a slide, but I love this slide. I could talk for an hour about this slide, right? Because if the point is like, okay, people aren't ready to sign up today, then the question is, what does it take? What do they think needs to be changed? So again, everything we look at, there is not anything that I can think of in the world of sustainability that I look at in which the economics making sense is not the most fundamental criteria, right? So nothing I'm about to say excludes that. That is just like, let's assume, because there's been a lot of calculations, right? Of like, what does it take to put in a multi-seed cover crop, yada, yada. Like this isn't about not paying folks what they need to be paid. That's a prerequisite in my mind and in what producers are saying, and that shows here. But let's look at the thing that runs neck and neck with producers, row crop producers here, of what do they need in order to feel like they can participate. That credits for pre-existing practices. When I saw that, I fell out of my chair because now this isn't just I'm doing something and I should be paid for it. This is fundamentally producers saying, we're trying to figure out if this thing that we're trying to get signed up for shares the same kind of understanding of operational reality and values that we have. And if you're not willing to pay the guys and the gals who started doing this kind of work, even before there was an incentive, we're not really sure that you're aligned with how we see the world, right? This feels shady. And so, I have to say two things when I say this. The first is like, that is such an obvious and clear human reaction. The second thing is the way, this goes back to the way. So anyway,
I'll kind of tee this back up and get us back on track here. So number one, it's got to pay. I think that is absolutely right. And I continue to say that as well. In my opinion on this, we're being asked to, the value of the carbon credit is less money than what it costs to create the carbon credit. So it's tough to make the jump. Now, I understand that we're playing in a global carbon market though, and folks can buy carbon credits in other sectors for really low amounts of money. And there's a wide array of different price of carbon credits. So I understand that like agriculture has to be competitive, and we have a lot of improvement that needs to be done when it comes to certainty and permanence and some of these metrics that tie into carbon offset markets. And we need to keep telling our story and building up that market and improving the value of the credits as we go. And I think over the
You
last
wanna
couple of years,
stick
we've
with
seen
the
the value of
credit.
these credits go up.
Yep.
These carbon credits, like they have increased in price, but maybe not quite the same. And then on the credits for pre-existing, I've had a lot of different conversations with folks on this one, and my personal thought on this might be a little different than a lot of farmers. Plenty of farmers want to get paid for what they've already done over the last couple of years. I actually don't care about getting paid for what I've already done. I did what I already did. We've been no-till since late 70s. We've been cover cropping since 2013. We did that because it's making us money and because it is better for our operation, and we did it on our own free will, and we made those choices. But now what I want to see happen is don't necessarily pay me for what I've already done, but compensate me adequately for what I'm doing today and what I bring to the table today. If you want to work with me and you want my story, adequately compensate for the story that I bring to the table and the data that I bring to the table. So I think that's really what this gets into. And yeah, Dr. Postian has got some great questions in here too. And number one, Dr. Postian, super honored when I saw your name come through that you registered. I'm like, holy crap, this is like we're making some awareness. For folks that don't know, Dr. Postian's out at Colorado State, one of the top folks in the entire world when it comes to soil organic carbon. So awesome to have you on. But okay, yeah. So
let me just chime in there.
Yeah.
So there's a couple things as a Climate Smart grant winner. So we've understood we're talking about carbon credits in sort of an offset market.
Yep.
Which that's 100% right. There is you actually can't get a credit if you can't show the change difference because of the funding that's being provided, right? That's just a prerequisite. I think it's a fundamental challenge with how markets have been structured.
That's right.
I think it's really interesting how the Climate Smart grant opportunities actually are starting to think about stacking practices, about helping folks who were early adopters actually think about deriving additional value because of the investment. So we're not trying to retro count something that can't be counted and count it sort of double counted as an emission reduction. But there are some really innovative thinking that's going on for folks who have made some of the early investments. And I think there's some really good Climate Smart grant winners who are focused there. I know our grant has a certain percentage of our folks who are early adopters who will be thinking about how do we stack practices for incentives.
Yeah. Being able to stack and take it further, but in my eyes here, that's why I like, again, I really like this carbon intensity thing because it looks at what's my annual actual number.
So let's talk about that. How are you defining carbon intensity right now?
With the GREET model. So from U.S. Department of Energy, the GREET model, just because that's what's laid out within the 45Z tax credit and the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's just, here's all of my farm management practices that get plugged into the GREET model, and that runs a carbon intensity score, essentially the carbon footprint per bushel and then per megajoule. And what we've done with Continuum Ag and Topsoil is we've just really simplified the farmer facing data collection process. That's less than 10 minutes. And that gets into like this next one and looking at your list here, the paperwork, like showing multiple years of historical data and all these records. That's a lot of stuff. And farmers, we've got a ton of data, but it's kind of hodgepodge a lot of times in multiple different locations. And that's where I like the carbon intensity piece too, where it's not what was I doing for the last 5 years. It's just, what am I doing today? What went into that bushel? And then back to the beef side, hey, what went into that bushel that got fed to those cows? And now all of that feed went in those cows, all the energy went into those cows, the water, the land and habitat, whatever went into that animal. And then you can divide that by the pounds of beef or milk that come out and define the intensity of each one
the productions, the processing. You have to add in
the processing. You got to have it all the way through to the end consumer. That's right.
Yep.
But anyway, but what I like on it is just where it's like, okay, I don't get a credit for what I did before, but because I've already been doing these things, my score is really good. My CI score is -4.1. instead of being the standard for Washington County of 29.4. So I'm able to show, hey, I've
Are you saying
already
you're carbon positive on your
carbon
operations?
negative. Yeah. Yeah.
Carbon
We're
negative.
carbon
Is that
negative. Yeah.
yep, yep.
Yep. According to the GREET model, once again, GREET model, because we're, no-till cover crop, 212 bushel corn with low synthetic fertilizer inputs and low fuel and energy,
Yep.
slightly carbon negative, negative 4.1. Yeah.
That's new.
But okay. So like, yeah, seeing some of these things kind of starting to change with, we gotta pay for it.
Right.
We got to figure out how to get early adopters in. And Dr. Keith Posting's got a great point. I've seen a lot of this too. Like, if you want to make major change, you kind of got to get the early adopters involved. And this just completely alienated them, because it was about the practice change and it really focused on that. And if you already made the practice changes, you either didn't really qualify, or like in my case, we can always continue to make changes and continue to do better. But it's just such a small incremental additional change that then the value of that small change is really minimal and really doesn't make the paperwork worth it. And, some of these other components.
And I think that's why we really do see this world evolving, right? And we've talked about, so from a carbon offset, a strict, an outside the supply chain carbon offset, right? An energy company is trying to, or a software company is trying to buy a carbon offset from a farmer, which is sort of where we've been, to either carbon intensity within a supply chain, right? And then you've got the SBT, the science-based targets initiatives, and thinking about improvements along a supply chain, so that you can have multiple folks investing, which might be a way that we get higher returns back to producers, to help meet their overall supply chain goals. That's another way that this can happen and can evolve. And look, I've been involved in carbon markets since the 90s. Like, we know that that our natural systems and our production systems have a lot to offer here, but we have to figure out what the rules of the road are that both meet clear science, for what is it we're trying to measure and communicate about, and then actually work within the production systems we've got.
Totally agree. And I think part of that ends up being what you had laid out before. Agriculture is an annual thing. It's not we don't work in terms of a one-time practice change that I used to have this footprint and now I make a change and now for eternity I have a different footprint. That's not how agriculture works. Every year our footprint's going to be different. And like even our
And that's actually one of the
scores,
hard parts of the carbon offsets, right? So in addition to additionality, which is you had to do it because of the money, the other piece that's required is permanence. So permanence in an annualized system has also been challenging. And so some of the things that we're talking about start to address that too.
Well, and when you factor in from an ag context, the most important element for growing crops and the most abundant element in our own bodies is carbon.
Right.
And if we have all that carbon permanently locked away for forever, that actually might not be a good thing. What we actually need is longer cycles of getting that carbon in more stable pools in our soil, but where we can actually keep it in the agricultural cycle rather than it cycling clear up into the atmosphere and causing major issues there. We need to keep it in our cycle down here where we can actually feed people and infiltrate water and reduce flooding and all that good stuff.
I might say that a little differently. I might say that each system, agriculture versus energy versus transport, that contributes to emissions reductions, I think we're moving towards a model in which we're asking each sector to be responsible for its own carbon balance in a way that is not trying to trade off where one sector is going to allow another sector to do something that doesn't make sense.
That's right.
The natural system.
It's back to more of like, looking at that holistic picture and tracking this stuff all the way through. Okay. And that kind of, I just looked at the time. We only have
I know this is so classic Mitchell and Amy. Sorry.
Well, you said that we could talk about just this slide for an hour, but one of the things that we're kind of hitting on here is Dr. Keith Posting's other question here of what are you seeing in terms of like the value here and the value of carbon offsets, where the carbon goes one direction and the product goes the other, versus the value of that carbon story and the product going together. Do you see a world where the consumer is going to pay for it, or maybe some insight from the companies that you guys are working with? Like, would they rather pay for a credit or would they rather pay for a low carbon like commodity?
I think it's early days. Everything's early days. Everything's Wild West. But I think we've seen this explosion of interest in putting the two things back together.
Yep.
Put the ecosystem service benefit with the, food, fiber, fuel commodity that is being produced. And then to look at it at either a supply chain level, or to look at it at a regional level. Right. And so one of the interesting things about the Climate Smart Commodities program is I think it really pushed along this thinking of how do you put those things together. Doesn't mean that there's not folks who are trying to separate them out in that program. We are not. We actually think that it's a tremendous benefit Climate Smart grant for a producer to say, I am marketing a value added commodity. Think about it. As agriculture, we know how to do value added commodity marketing, right?
Yep.
That's not that different.
For
We're
sure.
not trying to get into something different. To have, clear, proven, third party verified value add claims is something that we know how to do as agriculture. And that seems to be one of the trends that we see.
Yeah. And yeah, that's where, seeing my quick opinion on this is I think we're going to see that accelerate because of these 45Z things. Just setting a precedent here on, hey, here is how we can create a value add low carbon fuel marketplace, therefore include low carbon grain to produce that low carbon fuel. And because of these tax credits, huge dollars that are going to be driven on that. And that's where I think, maybe can set a precedent for non-fuel marketplaces where we can look at, hey, here is how we can quantify the carbon intensity. It might not be perfect. I don't think it is perfect. I think it needs a lot of research and data coming together, but hey, it's good enough. Let's have the conversation. Let's combine together some of these different tools. And the folks over at the Argonne Lab need to talk to our buddy, Dr. Postian a lot more. I'll put in that plug there for us. And then to Bob, to your point on the 45Z stuff though, 45Z is only focused on carbon, not on water quality, not on some of these other outcomes. And yeah, Amy, you talked about those before, that we need to not pigeonhole ourselves into only thinking about carbon, but it's all these other positive outcomes that also come along with good soil management, good crop management, good livestock management, lots of stackable outcomes that we need to tell that story as well.
And I think the other point that Bob's making here, which is a really important point, is, we can get the science right and we can sort of get the preparing farmers right. But if we don't get the policy environment right, we've lost one of the legs of our stools. And so certainly farmer safety net programs have to, it's essential. They have to evolve to recognize what we're doing here. I know there are good efforts underway there. I am less certain that I see good outcomes there. If I'm wrong, I would love to hear that there are good outcomes in shifting how safety net programs can evolve to take some of this stuff into consideration.
Yeah, it always is on the chopping block, every single farm bill. Like, what are we going to do with the crop insurance program? But also, what I'm getting at here too, all these programs have kind of been evolving, they're making strides. And then you have this 45Z credit that comes in that just completely bombshells all of it of hey, here's this new scoring system and new business model that you toss that in. And now it's well, geez, that changes the equation here quite a bit.
Yep.
Where my, my negative 4.1 score with my local ethanol plant, together we can create $1.92 per bushel in value with that score. $406 an acre.
That's amazing.
That score is worth. Now we got to work together to get that. Neither one of us is going to get that whole chunk. And neither one of us are going to see anything without working together here. But the ability now to really start putting some metrics on the actual product itself and tying the financials to that, where farmers, hey, the further you want to take this, the more you can get compensated. I think that's just a great move in the right direction. But it takes data to do it, which is your next deal here. If we want to do anything, if you want to get paid at all, you got to have data. Which is we keep preaching here at Continuum Ag as well. If you want any of this stuff, you got to have data.
So this is the other sort of rain I feel like we put on people's parades, but how many different opportunities do we see and solutions for data gathering do we see? And yet the uptake, we do see increases in this year over year, which is good. But we do see that software-based, farm management information systems does uptake. It is increasing, but it is super slowly. And the thing that I always say, and the thing that I just say over and over and over and over again, I don't care whether we're talking about a carbon offset, we're talking about a supply chain incentive program, we're talking about a climate smart grant, we're talking about carbon intensity. I don't care. It depends on data. Data powers the climate smart agriculture economy.
100%.
Data powers the climate smart agriculture economy. And so I am passionate about farmers understanding the data, knowing how to gather the data, seeing value in the data. Because what we see is not only are folks not using it, but they're not using it because they're not, they saw value in it, they would be doing it. So, so that is really what our climate smart grant is about. And maybe you can flip to a side. I want to just get to the QR code because if people are listening and are interested in finding out more about our grant, we are one of the 140. So there's lots of options out there. I'm not just pitching ours, but our project is really focused on this. So we're doing two things. We're using data that we have within the Farm Journal ecosystem in order to help match producers up with solutions, practices and the solutions for those practices that make sense for their operation. And then we are also partnering each enrollee in our program with a data provider to help gather the data, and then with a data coach. So it's not just the solution, but it is also the coach that sits next to them and helps them figure out how to find value in it. And that QR code would take you to a link on our website where you can find out more about the program and ask for more information.
Cool. I know there's a couple more here, and folks, I know we're kind of running out of time, but if you've got any couple questions, definitely put the last couple in the chat. But check out the site. Obviously a lot of different partners.
Yeah.
And I know there's some certain
great
states
group of partners.
too.
The other thing, given this community is such a tight community, Andy Lyon, who was at the Kansas Department of Ag, has joined us and is really running the ground game for the grants. So folks probably know him, and he has just joined us here. Here are the data platforms that we're working with. They're custom tailored in, the information stays with you. And then, obviously we're using it to do the reporting for the grant that we have to, but the whole goal is, before and after, our goal is to make sure that producers feel like they can see value in this data so that when this grant money goes away, because it will, that both the practices and the data gathering feel of value.
Yeah. This is looking like a lot of livestock stuff. Is the grant kind of livestock focused?
Keep flipping. There you go. Go back. Either one. So we are in 19 states across 16 different practices. So it is not just livestock focused by any means. We've got a large contingent across row crops, large set of practices across row crops. We are doing beef and dairy. We are also have a historically underserved component for smaller producers in specialty crops as well. So the whole point was, how do we be really agnostic about the production system? As you can see, 19 different states right down the middle of the country and over. We think everyone can benefit from understanding the data and finding value in it.
Totally. And a lot of this stuff for everyone too, there's a lot of the grants and stuff out there. And what I like on what you just showed is hey, there's some of these practices that are different, a wide array of different tools and stuff too. And part of it, we got to kind of sort out how do these different programs jive with each other? How do they, what we're talking here on? Obviously, I'm super sold on this carbon intensity thing. How's that going to jive with these carbon programs like this? What about typical cost share programs? What about, both private and public cost share? How's all this stuff going to jive together? And I don't know, maybe you have a hot take on that, but
so
what are you seeing so far? Maybe what are you hearing from USDA too, of how we're going to stack?
Okay, so there's two different things. There's two different concerns, in the minute we have left. The things that we have to tackle next as a community are first, there's 140 projects out there in the first tranche alone that are out there now communicating with producers about what this climate smart commodity world means. And there's such a diverse array of projects. We don't really have, people are going to get hit. There's states with 30 different projects operating in them. Yeah. People are going to get hit from all over. Yeah. We're going to confuse people as to what this is about and what's underlying it. And then we're also going to confuse people with which is the right one for me. Totally. So very soon, we have been promising this. I just saw the version. Very soon, we're going to have on AgWeb a tool that will allow folks to figure out what state, which practices make sense and spit out for them, which entities, which projects make sense for them. So that's one piece of it. And then in terms of how these things stack, I am not hearing enough conversation about that, Mitchell, because, the whole world starts from the program down, and what you and I are trying to do is start from the farmer up. Totally. So maybe this can be our next big project together.
Yeah. That just continues to, it appears to me, and that's kind of what I want to hit on here too. Hey, some of the stuff that I'm really focused on with carbon intensity, that is right now, you're only going to get paid if you're growing corn or soybeans that's going into biofuel production. The project you laid out is way beyond that.
Way bigger than that.
So, hey, let's do it. The piece of this being here as well, 6 billion bushels a year goes into ethanol. 6 billion.
I was going to say, that's just biofuel production is not a very small amount, right? That's a lot.
Out of the 15 billion bushels of corn that we produce in this country, 6 billion of those bushels, 40% goes into biofuel. And it's gonna have a CI score, guaranteed. That's part of their thing. So it's just, okay, of that reduction in your CI, how do we account for it correctly? And how do we really tell that story? And but I do think that it ends up really being what you're laying out, where it's got to be all connected, and we need to tell our story on the product that you're producing, whether that be corn or soybeans that's going to biofuel, or that's going to pigs like most of mine does, or going into beef, or you are, a livestock producer. It all boils down to the data, and people want to hear about that story. And I think that's why we've seen Trust in Food just explode from being just started a couple of years ago to what are you guys, 40 employees now, at least.
Something in there.
It's wild. So,
it is wild.
But just that need to tell that story and to have data. So, Amy, fun stuff. It obviously went too fast, and we could have dug in a lot of different angles here, but want to be cautious of time. We're right at the top of the hour. Amy, thanks so much for spending the time. For everyone else, hey, we're having another webinar talking on carbon intensity, talking on biologicals and nitrogen management on November 21st. We're getting another one on the 28th. We're working through what we're going to do throughout December and the holiday season and stuff. So we'll be posting in our email and stuff about that. And we're going to get some additional big time guests lined up here too throughout all of 2024 as well. So Amy, it's been great. Awesome stuff here.
Fun as always. Thanks, Mitchell. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see y'all later.
Thanks.